He spent 365 nights whispering his daughter's name into the darkness, waiting for an answer that never came. The most feared mafia boss in Chicago had brought empires to their knees, yet he could not find one little girl, until a barefoot child in a torn dress walked up to him on a crumbling sidewalk in the city's most forgotten slum and shattered everything he thought he knew. She pointed at the crumpled poster in his trembling hands and spoke 9 words that stopped his heart cold. "That girl sleeps in the room next to mine." She was only 7 years old, covered in bruises she had learned to hide, with eyes that had seen far too much pain for such a small soul. She had no idea that what she was about to reveal would expose a web of secrets darker than any nightmare, tear apart the only home she had ever known, and force a broken mafia king to confront a truth that would either destroy him or set them both free. 1 year earlier, Marcus Thornton had been a man who made the city tremble with a single glance. At 37 years old, he controlled the entire south side of Chicago through an empire built on shadows and silence. To the public, he was the sophisticated owner of a chain of upscale Italian restaurants that stretched from the Gold Coast to Oak Park. To those who knew better, he was the king of a world where loyalty was paid in blood and betrayal was punished with disappearance. His mansion in Lincoln Park stood as a monument to his power, 3 stories of gray stone and iron gates, surrounded by gardens that his late wife had planted before the cancer took her 4 years ago. The roses still bloomed every spring, tended by gardeners who never dared look him in the eye. But Marcus did not care about the roses or the mansion or the restaurants that bore his name. He cared about one thing only, and she was 5 years old with golden curls and eyes the color of storm clouds. Lily was his miracle, his redemption, the only proof that something good had ever come from his blood-stained hands. Every night, no matter how many men he had ordered broken that day, he would come home and read her stories about princesses and dragons. She would fall asleep with her small fingers wrapped around his thumb, and in those quiet moments, Marcus Thornton was not a monster. He was just a father. Then came the afternoon that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday in September, the kind of golden autumn day when the leaves burned orange against a perfect blue sky. Lily had been playing on the swings at her private school, surrounded by teachers and security cameras, and all the protection his money could buy. One moment she was there, laughing as she pumped her legs higher and higher toward the sun. The next moment she was gone. No witnesses, no ransom note, no body, just an empty swing creaking in the wind, and a father who felt his soul leave his chest. Marcus unleashed every resource in his considerable arsenal. His men tore through the city like wolves, interrogating, threatening, destroying anyone who might have information. He offered rewards that could have purchased mansions. He called in favors from police captains and federal agents who owed him their careers and sometimes their lives. He reached out to rival organizations, begging enemies he had spent decades fighting to help him find one small girl. Nothing. For 365 days, nothing. The empire began to crumble without his attention. Territories were lost. Deals fell apart. Men who once feared him started to whisper that Marcus Thornton had become a ghost haunting his own kingdom. His eyes sank into hollows. His suits hung loose on a frame that forgot how to eat. The gray at his temples spread like frost across his dark hair. Only Daniel Reeves remained, the 40-year-old soldier who had served Marcus for 15 years and loved Lily like the daughter he never had. Daniel handled the business, held the empire together with desperate hands, and watched his boss disappear piece by piece into grief. Then one morning, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He would go where his men refused to search, into the heart of Englewood, the most dangerous neighborhood in Chicago, where even police patrols feared to tread. The black Mercedes rolled slowly through streets that seemed to belong to a different country, a different century. Marcus had dismissed Daniel's protests that morning, had refused the bodyguards who always shadowed his movements, had left his visible weapons locked in the safe at home. He wanted to be invisible today, just another desperate father searching for his lost child in places where hope came to die. Englewood unfolded before him like an open wound in the heart of Chicago. Rows of abandoned houses lined the cracked streets, their windows boarded with plywood that had been tagged so many times the graffiti formed layers like geological strata. Porches sagged under the weight of neglect. Lawns had surrendered to weeds that grew waist-high around rusted car frames and broken appliances. The occasional occupied home stood like a defiant soldier among the corpses of its neighbors, marked by curtains in the windows and children's toys scattered on dying grass. Marcus parked at a corner where a stop sign had been bent nearly horizontal by some forgotten collision. He stepped out into the August heat, feeling the sun press down on his shoulders like a physical weight. The air smelled of garbage and exhaust and something else underneath. the particular scent of poverty that no amount of money could ever make him forget. He had grown up in a neighborhood not so different from this one, back before the restaurants and the empire and the blood on his hands. He pulled a rolled poster from inside his jacket and walked to a rusted light pole that had once been painted green. The tape dispenser felt familiar in his hands now, almost comforting in its routine. He had performed this ritual hundreds of times across every corner of Chicago, in wealthy suburbs and middle-class neighborhoods, and places like this, where the police rarely bothered to patrol. The poster showed Lily on her 5th birthday, wearing a pink dress with a crown of paper flowers in her golden hair. She was laughing at something outside the frame, her gray eyes bright with joy, a smear of chocolate frosting on her chin. Below the photograph, the words had faded from their original bold black to a tired gray that matched the despair in Marcus's chest. Missing. Lily Thornton, 5 years old, reward for information. He pressed the tape against the pole, smoothing the paper with palms that had once strangled men without trembling but now shook with the simple effort of not collapsing. Around him, the neighborhood continued its indifferent rhythm. A woman pushed a shopping cart filled with aluminum cans past him without a glance. 2 teenagers on a porch stopped their conversation to watch him with suspicious eyes, then returned to their phones. Children kicked a deflated soccer ball through an empty lot, their laughter sharp and oblivious. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked. Nobody cared about one more missing child in a city that swallowed them whole. Marcus stood before the poster, his hand still pressed against his daughter's faded smile, and felt the familiar emptiness threatening to pull him under. He had searched for 365 days. He had spent millions. He had broken bones and burned bridges and begged on his knees to God and the devil alike. Then he felt it, a prickling at the back of his neck, the instinct that had kept him alive through decades in the underworld. Someone was watching him. He turned slowly, expecting a threat, expecting nothing at all. Instead, he found a girl standing a few steps away, barefoot on the scorching sidewalk, her body thin as a whisper beneath a torn dress. She stared not at him, but at the poster still clutched in his trembling hands, and her eyes held something that made his heart forget how to beat. Marcus studied the child before him with eyes that had learned to read people the way scholars read books. She was 7 years old, perhaps 8, though her small frame made it difficult to tell. Her body was thin in the way that spoke of meals skipped and hunger ignored, arms like pale sticks poking out from a dress that had once been blue, but had faded to the color of dirty dishwater. The fabric was torn at the shoulder, revealing a birthmark that caught his attention immediately, a patch of darker skin shaped unmistakably like a butterfly with its wings spread wide. But it was the bruises that made his jaw tighten. Faded yellow marks circled her upper arms like bracelets, the kind left by fingers that gripped too hard. A greenish shadow colored her left cheek, almost hidden beneath the dirt smudged across her face. Her feet were bare and calloused, the soles blackened from walking on streets that must have burned in this August heat. She stood with the stillness of a child who had learned that sudden movements brought pain. The girl did not flinch under his examination. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and asked in a voice that was surprisingly clear, "Why do you keep putting up those papers everywhere?" Marcus blinked. "You have seen me before?" "3 times, she said. "Once on Halsted Street, once near the old church, and now here." She pointed at the poster still in his hands. "That girl in the picture. Who is she?" Something cracked in Marcus's chest, a small fissure in the wall he had built to survive the past year. "She is my daughter," he said, and the words came out rough, scraped raw by 12 months of saying them to strangers who never had answers. "Her name is Lily. She disappeared 1 year ago." The girl stepped closer, her dark eyes fixed on the photograph with an intensity that seemed too heavy for such a young face. Marcus watched her study Lily's smile, the paper crown of flowers, the smear of chocolate on her chin. Seconds stretched into something longer, thicker, harder to breathe through. Then the girl's eyes widened. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Marcus had spent his life reading the tiny signals that meant the difference between life and death. He saw recognition flash across her features, saw her lips part slightly, saw her thin shoulders stiffen beneath the torn dress. His heart began to pound against his ribs with a violence that frightened him. "You know something?" he whispered. It was not a question. The girl looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw a weight that no child should carry. She glanced over her shoulder at the empty street, then back at him, and when she finally spoke, her words landed like bullets in his chest. The 9 words she said made the world stop spinning. Marcus felt his knees give way beneath him. The street blurred at the edges of his vision. The sounds of the neighborhood faded to nothing, leaving only the frantic drumming of his own pulse and the face of this bruised, barefoot child who had just handed him something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. His voice cracked as a single question tore itself from his throat. Where? Where is she? Marcus dropped to his knees on the scorching pavement, bringing himself level with the girl's eyes. His hands trembled at his sides, shaking with a violence he could not control, and he had to press them against his thighs to keep them still. The concrete burned through the fabric of his trousers, but he did not notice. He did not notice anything except the small face before him and the impossible words she had just spoken. Tell me more, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please, tell me everything. The girl glanced around nervously, her bare feet shifting on the hot sidewalk. I hear her at night, she said quietly. Through the wall. She cries a lot, especially when it gets dark. And she says a word over and over again. Marcus's throat closed. What word? Daddy. The girl's voice dropped even lower. She keeps calling for her daddy, but nobody ever comes. The world tilted beneath Marcus. For 365 days, he had imagined his daughter calling for him in the darkness, reaching out for hands that were not there, and he had tortured himself with the thought that she believed he had abandoned her. Now this stranger child was confirming his worst nightmare with the casual honesty of the young, and the pain was so sharp he nearly doubled over. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. A flame that had been reduced to embers over the past year suddenly caught oxygen and roared back to life. Hope. Terrible, dangerous hope that he was afraid to trust. The woman you live with, Marcus managed to say. What does she tell you about the girl? Mommy Diana says she is very sick. Emma twisted her hands together in front of her torn dress. She says, I must never go near that room, never talk to her, never tell anyone she is there. She says bad things will happen if I do. And do you believe her? That the girl is sick? Emma shook her head slowly. Sick people go to doctors. Sick people have medicine and visitors. That girl has nothing. She just has a locked door in the dark. Marcus studied the child before him, truly seeing her for the first time. The bruises on her arms, the hunger in her cheeks, the way she flinched whenever his hand moved too quickly. This girl was not just a messenger from fate. She was a prisoner herself. What is your name? He asked softly. Emma. Emma, how did you come to live with this woman? The girl's eyes flickered with something old and tired. The orphanage gave me to her 6 months ago. They said I was lucky to have a new mommy. She paused, and her small fingers touched the faded bruise on her cheek. I do all the cleaning and the cooking. I sleep in the corner of the kitchen. I eat what is left over. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and familiar. The kind of rage that had built his empire and destroyed his enemies. But he forced it down. This child needed gentleness, not fury. Can you take me to your house, Emma? Can you show me where this girl is? Fear flashed across Emma's face. She took a small step backward, her bare heel scraping against the concrete. Mommy will hurt me if she knows I talk to you, she whispered, her eyes dropping to the ground. For a long moment, she stood motionless, caught between terror and something else. Then slowly, she raised her head. Her dark eyes met his, and in them burned a spark that cut through the fear like a blade through shadow. But that girl cries every night, just like I used to. Emma turned without another word and began walking, her small bare feet moving across the burning pavement with the practiced ease of someone who had long stopped feeling pain. Marcus followed, leaving his Mercedes parked at the corner where anyone could strip it for parts within the hour. He did not care. He would have walked through fire itself if this child promised Lily waited on the other side. They moved through a maze of narrow alleys that twisted between crumbling buildings like veins through diseased flesh. The smell hit Marcus first, rotting garbage baking in the August heat, mixing with the sharp tang of urine and something sweeter underneath that he did not want to identify. Stray dogs watched them pass with hungry eyes, too tired to bark, too beaten to hope for scraps. From the windows of occupied houses, faces appeared briefly behind torn curtains, suspicious gazes tracking the stranger in the expensive clothes following a barefoot child into the depths of their forgotten world. Marcus watched Emma navigate the broken concrete and shattered glass with an ease that broke his heart. Her feet were a map of survival, the soles thick with calluses that had formed layer upon layer over months or perhaps years of walking without shoes. She did not wince when she stepped on a pebble. She did not slow when the pavement became so hot that Marcus could feel it through his leather soles. How long have you lived here? He asked, keeping his voice low. 6 months, Emma answered without turning around. Before that, the orphanage. Before that, my father's apartment. But he drank too much and hit too hard, and then one day he did not wake up anymore. The words came out flat, rehearsed, as if she had told this story so many times that it had lost all its sharp edges. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a knot of anger and sorrow so tangled he could not separate one from the other. "And your mother?" "She left when I was 2. I do not remember her face." Emma ducked under a sagging chain-link fence, holding it up for Marcus to follow. "Mommy Diana tells everyone she adopted me because she wanted to give a poor orphan a better life. But I think she just wanted someone to clean her floors and wash her dishes." They passed a group of teenagers smoking on a corner, their eyes tracking Marcus with predatory interest until they saw something in his face that made them look away. Even here, even broken by grief and desperate hope, he carried the presence of a man who had commanded an empire through fear. Emma stopped suddenly at the end of a narrow street, where the houses pressed so close together they seemed to lean on each other for support. She pointed at a structure that stood slightly apart from its neighbors, its walls painted a sickly yellow that had faded to the color of old teeth. Iron bars covered every window, and thick curtains blocked any view of the interior. The front door was reinforced with a metal security gate, the kind designed to keep the world out, or to keep something in. "This is it," Emma whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. "The room with the locked door is at the end of the hallway. She is in there." Marcus stared at the house, memorizing every detail, calculating entry points and escape routes out of pure instinct. Then he saw it. A slight movement at the corner window, the twitch of a curtain being pulled aside by an unseen hand. Someone inside was watching them. The curtain fell back into place, and seconds later, Marcus heard the sound of multiple locks being undone from within. The metal security gate swung open with a screech of rusted hinges, and then the front door followed, revealing a woman who stood in the threshold like a spider greeting flies to her web. Diana Mercer was 34 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back in a ponytail that was meant to look casual but felt calculated. Her face was pleasant in an ordinary way, the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd, that witnesses would struggle to describe to police. But her eyes betrayed her. They were the pale blue of winter ice, and they held no warmth at all despite the smile that stretched across her lips. "Emma, sweetheart," Diana said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Where have you been? And who is this gentleman?" The transformation in Emma was immediate and devastating. The brave girl who had led Marcus through the alleys shrank into herself, her shoulders curving inward, her eyes dropping to the ground. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the mere presence of this woman. "I found him on the corner," Emma whispered. "He was lost." Marcus stepped forward before Diana could respond, extending his hand with the practiced ease of a man who had lied his way through 1,000 business deals. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Michael Roberts. I work with the Chicago Community Outreach Foundation. We are surveying this neighborhood to identify families who might benefit from our assistance programs." The lie came smoothly, wrapped in the respectable vocabulary of charity that opened doors in places like this. Diana's cold eyes assessed him for a long moment, searching for cracks in his story, calculating risks and rewards. Then her smile widened, and she stepped aside. "How wonderful," she said. "Please, come in. It is not much, but we do our best." Marcus crossed the threshold into the house, his senses alert to every detail. The interior was small, but surprisingly clean. The floors swept, the sparse furniture arranged with care. It was the kind of cleanliness that required effort, the kind that Emma's small hands had no doubt produced through hours of labor. Family photographs lined one wall, all featuring Diana alone or Diana with Emma, the poses stiff and staged like advertisements for a happiness that did not exist. His eyes traveled down the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house. 3 doors, 2 of them open to reveal a cramped bathroom and a bedroom with a neatly made bed. The 3rd door was different. It was closed, and on its surface hung a padlock, heavy and silver and utterly out of place in this shabby home. Diana followed his gaze, and something flickered across her face too quickly to read. "Storage," she said lightly. "Old things from my late husband. I cannot bear to sort through them yet." "I understand," Marcus replied, though he understood far more than she realized. Behind him, Diana's hand closed around Emma's arm with sudden force. "Go finish the dishes," she hissed, her voice dropping to something cold and hard. "Now!" Emma scurried toward the kitchen without a word, and Marcus pretended not to notice the finger-shaped bruises that matched the ones already fading on the child's skin. Then, from behind the locked door at the end of the hallway, came a sound that stopped his heart, a small cough, the wet, rattling cough of a child fighting a cold, the same cough he had heard 1,000 times through Lily's bedroom door on winter nights when he would bring her honey tea and read her stories until she fell asleep. Marcus forced his face to remain neutral, forced his hands to stay still at his sides when every instinct screamed at him to tear down that locked door with his bare hands. He had built an empire on the ability to control his emotions, to show nothing while feeling everything, and he called upon every ounce of that discipline now. "What a lovely home," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Do you live here alone with your daughter?" Diana settled onto the worn sofa, gesturing for him to take the chair opposite. Her smile remained fixed in place, but her eyes never stopped calculating. "Just Emma and myself, yes. It has been difficult since my husband passed, but we manage. I am sorry for your loss. Was it recent? 2 years now." Diana's hand fluttered to her chest in a gesture of practiced grief. "Cancer." He went quickly, which was a blessing, but the pain never truly fades. Marcus nodded sympathetically while his gaze swept the room with renewed attention. The photographs on the wall showed only Diana and Emma in various staged poses. Not a single image featured a man. No wedding portrait, no family vacation snapshot, no candid moment captured between husband and wife. The bookshelf held romance novels and women's magazines, but nothing that suggested a male presence had ever occupied this space. No worn boots by the door, no large coat on the hooks, no subtle signs of a life shared. Diana was lying about the husband, which meant she was likely lying about everything else. His eyes continued their careful survey and stopped on something half hidden beneath the sofa, a glimpse of yellow fabric and synthetic hair peeking out from the shadows. His heart clenched so violently he thought it might stop altogether. A doll. A blonde doll in a yellow dress with painted blue eyes and a permanent smile. Marcus knew that doll. He had bought it himself 3 years ago from a toy store on Michigan Avenue. Lily had named her Princess Sunshine and had refused to sleep without her for months. The doll had been clutched in his daughter's arms on the morning of her disappearance, captured in the last photograph ever taken of her at school. Diana followed his gaze and saw what he was looking at. The mask of kindness cracked for just an instant, revealing something sharp and panicked beneath. She rose from the sofa with sudden urgency, her movements too quick, too defensive. "I think that is enough questions for today," she said, her voice losing its honeyed quality. "Emma and I have dinner to prepare, and I am sure you have other families to visit. Of course." Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing through possibilities and plans. "Thank you for your time." Diana's hand pressed against his back with firm insistence, guiding him toward the door with barely concealed force. "You should leave now," she said, and the sweetness was entirely gone. "You are scaring my daughter." Marcus stepped outside into the fading afternoon light. The door slammed shut behind him, followed by the rapid clicking of multiple locks. He stood motionless on the crumbling porch, his heart pounding against his ribs. Then he turned for one final look at the house. The curtain of the locked room had shifted, pulled aside by a small hand, and there, pressed against the dirty glass, was a tiny palm attached to a thin wrist that wore a silver bracelet, a bracelet engraved with the letter L. The same bracelet Marcus had clasped around his daughter's wrist on her 5th birthday, promising that one day he would add more charms for every year she grew older. Marcus walked away from the house with deliberate calm, his steps measured and unhurried despite the wildfire burning through his veins. He could feel Diana watching him from behind the curtains, tracking his departure with those cold blue eyes, so he forced himself to move like a man with nothing more pressing than paperwork waiting on his desk. Only when he turned the corner and passed beyond her line of sight did he break into a run. His fingers trembled so violently that it took 3 attempts to dial Daniel's number. When his second-in-command answered on the first ring, Marcus could barely form words through the tightness in his throat. "I found her." The sentence came out broken, ragged. "Daniel, I found Lily." Silence stretched across the line, heavy with disbelief. "Are you certain?" "I saw her bracelet. The one I gave her for her birthday." She pressed her hand against the window, and I saw it. Marcus leaned against a crumbling brick wall, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. "She is alive. My daughter is alive." Daniel's voice shifted immediately into tactical mode, the soldier in him awakening. "Give me the address. I will have a team there in 20 minutes. "No." Marcus forced himself to breathe, to think past the desperate need to smash through that locked door. "If we go in, guns blazing, whoever is behind this will know. They might have contingencies. They might hurt her before we can reach her. Then we call the police. And tell them what? That Marcus Thornton, the man they have been trying to put in prison for 15 years, has found his daughter being held captive by a stranger. They will investigate me before they investigate her. It will take days, maybe weeks, and by then Lily could be gone again." Daniel cursed softly, recognizing the truth in Marcus's words. "Then what do we do?" "Find out everything about the woman who lives in that house. Her name is Diana Mercer. I want to know who she is, who she works for, why she has my daughter." Marcus returned to his car as Daniel began making calls. Within 2 hours, information started flowing. Diana Mercer, 34 years old, employed as a social worker for the city of Chicago. No criminal record, no outstanding debts. A seemingly ordinary woman living a seemingly ordinary life in one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. Too ordinary, too clean. The kind of background that had been carefully constructed to withstand casual scrutiny. Night fell over Englewood like a black curtain, swallowing the streetlights that had long since been shot out or stolen. Marcus parked his car 1 block from Diana's house, hidden in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, and settled in to watch. Hours passed in agonizing slowness. The neighborhood grew quiet. Lights flickered off behind barred windows. Then, just past midnight, Marcus saw a small figure slip around the side of the yellow house. Emma moved through the darkness with the practiced silence of a child who had learned that being heard meant being hurt. She found his car by instinct rather than sight, her bare feet carrying her unerringly to his window. Marcus lowered the glass without a word. The girl reached into the pocket of her thin nightgown and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Her hands shook as she pressed it into his palm. Marcus unfolded the paper slowly, afraid of what he might find. A child's drawing stared back at him, crude crayon figures beneath a yellow sun. A tall man with dark hair, a small girl with golden curls, and beneath them, written in the shaky letters of a 6-year-old who had not held a pencil in far too long, were words that shattered him completely. "Help me, Daddy, Lily T." Marcus pressed the paper against his chest and felt hot tears sliding down his cheeks for the first time in 365 days. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at the small girl standing beside his car window. The moonlight caught the butterfly birthmark on her shoulder through the torn fabric of her nightgown, and he was struck again by how much this child had risked to bring him hope. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emma glanced nervously toward the house, then back at him. "She pushes things under the door sometimes. Notes, drawings, little pieces of paper she tears from the edge of old newspapers. I think she knows someone else is in the house. She is trying to reach anyone who might help. How long have you been collecting them?" "I found the first one a week ago." Emma's thin fingers twisted together. "I hid it inside my shirt because I knew Mommy Diana would hurt me if she found out, but I kept it anyway. I did not know who she was or who her daddy was, but I thought maybe someday I could find him." Marcus's heart ached at the courage contained in this fragile child. "Tell me more about what happens in that house. Everything you can remember." Emma's eyes grew distant, as if she were looking at something far away. "At night, when Mommy Diana thinks I am asleep, I hear her crying through the wall. Sometimes she sings to herself, very quiet, songs I do not recognize. I tried to look through the keyhole once, but it was blocked. So I found a crack in the wood near the bottom of the door, and I could see a little bit inside." "What did you see?" "A small room with no windows, a mattress on the floor, and a girl with yellow hair sitting in the corner, hugging her knees." Emma paused. She looked so sad, like she had forgotten how to smile. Marcus gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to storm into that house this very moment. But Emma was still talking, and he needed every piece of information she could give him. "Sometimes men come to visit Mommy Diana," she continued. "Always late at night, after the neighborhood goes quiet. They wear nice clothes, black suits and shiny shoes, not like the people who live around here. They talk in the kitchen, very low, so I cannot hear most of it. But once I was hiding in the pantry, and I heard them say a name." Marcus's breath stopped. "What name?" Emma screwed up her face in concentration, trying to recall the exact sound. Salazar. They said Salazar would be pleased, that everything was going according to his plan." The world around Marcus went silent. The name hit him like a bullet to the chest, tearing through flesh and bone and memory. Victor Salazar, the man whose younger brother had died 5 years ago in the bloody war for control of the South Side. The man who had sworn revenge on Marcus Thornton with his last breath before fleeing Chicago with what remained of his broken organization. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. The kidnapping without ransom, the year of silence, the impossibility of finding any trace. This was not about money. This was about pain. This was about making Marcus suffer for as long as possible before delivering the final blow. "They talked about something else," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "Last night, when the men came again, they said they were going to move her." Marcus turned sharply to face her. "Move her? Where?" "I do not know. Somewhere very far away." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She was too brave to let fall. "They said she would never be found. They said it would happen next week." The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice. Marcus drove through the dark streets of Chicago with a fury that matched the storm building inside him. 1 week. He had 1 week before Lily would vanish again, this time to a place where he might never find her. The thought clawed at his sanity, threatening to drag him under into the black waters of despair. But despair was a luxury he could not afford. Not now. Not when his daughter was so close. He reached the safe house on the west side just before 2 a.m. Daniel was already there, along with 6 of the most trusted soldiers in the organization, men who had proven their loyalty through blood and fire over the years. They gathered around a scarred wooden table in the basement, their faces grim in the harsh fluorescent light. "Tell me everything," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. Daniel spread a file across the table, photographs and documents spilling out like secrets exposed to daylight. Diana Mercer, 34 years old, works as a social worker for the city, specifically in child placement services. On paper, she is clean. No arrests, no suspicious activity, not even a parking ticket. But paper lies, Marcus said. It does. Daniel tapped a bank statement covered in highlighted entries. She receives a wire transfer every month from an offshore account. $5,000, regular as clockwork, for the past 12 months. The account is buried under so many shell companies that it took my best people 3 hours just to find the first layer. Salazar. Almost certainly. The money trail leads to several accounts we know his organization has used in the past. Daniel's jaw tightened. She is a pawn, low-level, disposable. I do not think she even knows whose child she is holding. She just knows she gets paid to keep a little girl locked in a room and ask no questions. Marcus stared at the photograph of Diana's face, memorizing every feature, every line. This woman had kept his daughter prisoner for a year. She had listened to Lily cry for her father every night and done nothing. The rage that filled him was cold and absolute, the kind that did not burn but froze, turning everything it touched into something hard and merciless. "We move tomorrow night," he said. Before Salazar has any chance to accelerate his timeline, one of the soldiers shifted uneasily. "If we go in too fast, they might have time to hurt the girl, or move her before we breach. That is why we will be precise." Marcus looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes in turn. No gunfire unless absolutely necessary. No explosions. We go in quiet. We secure my daughter, and we take Diana Mercer alive. She is going to tell us exactly where to find Victor Salazar. The men nodded, understanding the unspoken promise beneath his words. Diana would talk. Marcus would make certain of that. "Get some rest," he ordered. "Tomorrow we end this." The meeting dissolved, men filing out into the night to prepare for what was coming. But as Marcus sat alone in the empty basement, staring at his daughter's drawing, he could not shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. 8 blocks away, in a yellow house with barred windows, Diana Mercer stood in the shadows of the kitchen, watching through the window as Emma crept back toward the house. The girl thought she was invisible in the darkness, thought her midnight escape had gone unnoticed. She was wrong. Diana waited until Emma slipped through the back door, then stepped out of the shadows with the speed of a striking snake. Her fingers closed around the child's hair, yanking her backward with vicious force. "I saw you talking to that man," she hissed, dragging Emma toward the bedroom. "Who is he? What did you tell him?" The slap came hard and fast, snapping Emma's head to the side with enough force to send stars exploding across her vision. She stumbled backward, her bare feet scraping against the cold wooden floor, but Diana's grip on her hair held firm, yanking her upright before she could fall. "I asked you a question," Diana snarled, her face twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. The mask of kindness had shattered completely, revealing the monster that had always lurked beneath. "Who was that man? What did you tell him?" Emma tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Her scalp burned where Diana's fingers pulled at her roots. But she thought of the man with the sad gray eyes who had looked at her like she mattered, who had cried when he saw his daughter's drawing. She thought of the girl behind the locked door who sang herself to sleep every night because no one else would sing to her. "He was just asking for directions," Emma whispered, her voice steady despite the pain. "He was lost. I told him how to get back to the main road." Diana's eyes narrowed into slits of pale blue ice. "You are lying." The second slap was harder than the first, connecting with Emma's cheek with a crack that echoed through the silent house. This time Emma did fall, her small body crumpling to the floor, her hands barely catching herself before her face hit the wood. "I saw you talking for almost an hour," Diana hissed, crouching down to grab Emma's chin with cruel fingers. "I saw you go to his car in the middle of the night. Do you think I am stupid? Do you think I do not notice when my own property sneaks around behind my back?" Emma said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only weapon the weak possessed. Diana straightened up, disgust curling her lip. Fine. If you will not talk, you can spend some time thinking about the consequences of disobedience. She dragged Emma across the floor by her arm, ignoring the child's whimpers of pain, and threw open the door of a narrow closet in the hallway. The space inside was barely large enough for a grown person to stand, filled with the musty smell of old coats and forgotten things. Diana shoved Emma inside with enough force to send her sprawling against the back wall. You will stay there until you learn to keep your mouth shut, Diana spat. No food, no water, no bathroom. Maybe by morning you will remember who takes care of you and what happens to ungrateful little girls who betray their families. The door slammed shut, plunging Emma into absolute darkness. She heard the click of a lock being turned, then the sound of Diana's footsteps retreating down the hallway. Emma curled into a ball on the floor of the closet, her cheek throbbing, her scalp aching, her heart pounding with fear. Tears slid silently down her face, soaking into the dusty carpet beneath her. But even as she cried, she did not regret what she had done. She had seen the love in that man's eyes when he looked at his daughter's drawing. She had seen the desperation of a father who would do anything to bring his child home. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just had to survive until then. Through the thin wall that separated the closet from the locked room at the end of the hallway, Emma heard a soft sound, a gentle tapping, hesitant and afraid. Emma? A small voice, muffled but unmistakable. Is that you? Are you okay? Emma pressed her hand against the wall, against the place where the voice seemed to come from. For the first time, she was close enough to answer. I am here, she whispered back, her tears still falling. Do not be scared. Someone is coming to save you. The darkness inside the closet was absolute, the kind of black that pressed against Emma's eyes like velvet. But through the thin wall at her back, she could feel something warm, something alive, another heartbeat pulsing just inches away, separated only by wood and plaster, and the cruelty of the woman who held them both captive. What is your name? Lily's voice came through the wall like a ghost, fragile and hopeful and afraid all at once. Emma. She pressed her palm flat against the barrier between them, wishing she could push right through. What is yours? Lily. A pause. I have been here for a very long time. I thought maybe I dreamed you up. Sometimes I dream about people coming to help me, but when I wake up, I am still alone. Emma's heart broke at the loneliness in that small voice. I am real. I have been living in this house for 6 months. I heard you crying at night, but I was too scared to do anything. I am sorry it took me so long to be brave. You are brave now, Lily whispered. That is what matters. The two girls talked through the wall for hours, their voices barely louder than breathing, terrified that Diana might hear. Lily told Emma about her life before the locked room, about a big house in a nice neighborhood with a garden full of roses that her mother had planted before she got sick. She told her about a father who was tall and strong, with hands that could be frightening to others but always touched her gently, like she was made of something precious. He used to read me stories every night, Lily said, and Emma could hear the tears threatening to break through. He would do all the different voices, even the princess ones, and I would laugh so hard my tummy hurt. He promised he would always protect me, but then the bad people took me, and I have been waiting for him ever since. He is looking for you, Emma said. I met him today. He has been searching for a whole year. He cried when I showed him your drawing. Lily was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled with a hope that had been buried for 365 days. He cried? Like his heart was breaking, but in a happy way, too, because now he knows where you are. Emma told Lily about her own life then, about the mother who had walked away when she was still in diapers and the father who had drowned his misery in bottles until his liver gave out. She told her about the orphanage where the bigger kids stole her food and called her names because she looked different. She told her about coming to live with Diana, thinking she had finally found a home, only to discover she had traded one prison for another. I never had anyone who wanted to save me, Emma whispered into the darkness. Not once in my whole life. Lily was quiet for so long that Emma thought maybe she had fallen asleep. Then her voice came through the wall, soft but certain. When my daddy comes, I will ask him to save you too. I will not leave without you. I promise. Something cracked inside Emma's chest, something that had been frozen for so long she had forgotten it existed. You do not even know me. You have never seen my face. I know your voice. I know you were brave when you did not have to be. That is enough. The two children pressed their hands against the wall at the same time, feeling each other's warmth through the barrier that separated them. In the darkness of that terrible house, a bond formed that was stronger than blood, forged in shared suffering and desperate hope. "My daddy always keeps his promises," Lily said, her voice filled with a faith that had survived a year of captivity. "And now I am making one too. We are going to get out of here together." Emma closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely. For the first time in 7 years of abandonment and abuse and loneliness, she allowed herself to hope. The sky over Chicago had been threatening violence all day, clouds piling on top of clouds like bruises spreading across pale skin. By nightfall, the storm broke with a fury that seemed almost personal, as if the heavens themselves knew what was about to happen in a yellow house with barred windows. Marcus crouched in the shadows across the street, rain streaming down his face, soaking through his black jacket. Daniel was beside him, along with 8 of their best men, all of them positioned around the perimeter of Diana's house like wolves circling wounded prey. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, illuminating the neighborhood in stark white flashes before plunging it back into darkness. "All positions confirmed," Daniel murmured into his earpiece, his voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "We breach on your command." Marcus nodded but did not speak. His eyes were fixed on the window of the locked room, searching for any sign of movement behind the heavy curtains. His daughter was in there, just 50 feet away after 366 days of searching. The thought made his hands tremble with something that was not fear. Inside the house, Diana paced the kitchen floor like a caged animal. Her phone had rung 10 minutes ago, and the voice on the other end had turned her blood to ice. Salazar knew. Someone had been asking questions, following trails that should have been invisible. The operation was compromised. "Move the girl tonight," the voice had commanded. "A car will be there in 1 hour. If she is not ready, you will wish you had never been born." Diana's hands shook as she gathered her keys, her mind racing through contingencies. She needed insurance, something to bargain with if everything went wrong. Her thoughts turned to the closet where she had locked Emma the night before. She yanked open the closet door and dragged the half-starved child out by her arm. Emma blinked against the sudden light, her face still swollen from yesterday's beating, her body weak from 24 hours without food or water. But her eyes remained defiant, burning with a fire that Diana found deeply unsettling. "You are coming with me," Diana hissed, pulling Emma toward the hallway. "Stay quiet and do exactly what I say, or I will make you regret the day you were born." Emma stumbled along behind her, her legs barely able to support her weight. But as they passed the locked door at the end of the hallway, she saw Diana reach into her pocket and pull out a silver key, the key to Lily's prison. They were going to move her. Diana's fingers had just touched the padlock when a sound exploded through the house, louder than the thunder that shook the walls. Someone was pounding on the front door with enough force to splinter the wood. "Open up," a voice roared from outside. "Now!" Diana froze, the key clutched in her white-knuckled fist. Her eyes darted to Emma, to the locked room, to the front door that was already buckling under the assault. Another blow, and the security gate screamed in protest. A third, and the lock shattered into pieces. The door burst open, bringing with it a flood of rain and wind, and something far more terrifying. Marcus Thornton stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by a flash of lightning that turned the world white. Water streamed down his face like tears, but his expression held no grief, only cold, absolute purpose. His gray eyes found Diana across the room, and in them burned the wrath of a father who had spent 366 nights whispering his daughter's name into the darkness. The storm had arrived, and it wore his face. Marcus stepped into the house as his men poured in behind him, their movements precise and practiced despite the chaos of the storm. Water pooled on the floor around their boots. Lightning flashed through the broken doorway, casting wild shadows across the walls. The air crackled with tension thick enough to choke on. Diana reacted with the desperation of a cornered animal. In one swift motion, she grabbed Emma and pulled the child against her chest, a kitchen knife appearing in her hand as if conjured from thin air. The blade pressed against Emma's throat, not deep enough to draw blood, but close enough to make Marcus freeze mid-step. "Stay back!" Diana screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "All of you stay back or I will kill her." Marcus raised his hand, and his men stopped instantly, their weapons trained on Diana, but their fingers disciplined enough not to squeeze. He could see Emma's face, pale and terrified but somehow still defiant, her dark eyes fixed on him with an expression that begged him not to give up. "Let the children go," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm against the howling of the wind outside. "I only want my daughter. Release them both, and you might survive this night." Diana laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. "Your daughter? You think I did not figure it out? You are Marcus Thornton. They told me stories about you. The monster of the South Side. The man who makes people disappear. Her arm tightened around Emma. If I let them go, you will kill me anyway. If you hurt that child, I will make your death last for days. The promise hung in the air between them, more frightening than any threat Diana had ever heard. She could see it in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he meant every word. Her grip on the knife wavered. That moment of hesitation was all Emma needed. The girl sank her teeth into Diana's forearm with every ounce of strength her starved body possessed. Diana screamed in pain and shock, the knife clattering to the floor as she instinctively released her grip. Emma dropped to her knees and scrambled away, her voice rising above the thunder. The room! She is in the room! At the end of the hallway, Marcus was already moving. He sprinted down the narrow corridor, past the photographs of staged happiness, past the bathroom and the bedroom, until he reached the door with the heavy silver padlock. He did not slow down. He did not reach for the key that had fallen from Diana's pocket. He simply raised his leg and drove his foot into the wood with all the force of a year of grief and rage and desperate hope. The door exploded inward, splinters flying like shrapnel. The room beyond was small and dark, lit only by the lightning that flashed through a crack in the boarded window. A thin mattress lay on the floor, covered with a threadbare blanket, and huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her golden hair tangled and dirty, her body far too thin beneath a faded nightgown, was a little girl with gray eyes that widened in disbelief. "Daddy!" The word tore through Marcus like a bullet, shattering something that had been frozen inside him for 366 days. He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees, gathering his daughter into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that had done such terrible things. Lily clung to him, her small fingers digging into his jacket, her face buried in his chest, her body shaking with sobs that had been held captive for far too long. Marcus held her tighter, his own tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain that still dripped from his hair. 1 year of searching. 365 nights of whispering her name into the darkness. Finally, he had his answer. Marcus knelt on the cold floor of that tiny prison, his daughter wrapped in his arms, her heartbeat pounding against his chest, like a bird desperate to escape its cage. He breathed in the scent of her hair, dirty and unwashed, but still carrying traces of the little girl who used to smell like strawberry shampoo and sunshine. Lily trembled against him, her small body shaking with sobs she could not control, her fingers clutching his jacket as if afraid he might disappear. "I knew you would come," she whispered between gasps. "I knew you would find me, Daddy." I never stopped believing. Marcus could not speak. The words were trapped somewhere in his chest, drowning in tears he had held back for an entire year. He simply held her tighter, rocking gently back and forth, letting his presence speak the promises his voice could not form. From the hallway came the sounds of struggle, Diana's shrill protests as Daniel and 2 other men restrained her. They dragged her into the living room, forcing her to her knees on the water-stained carpet. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara, her hair wild around her face, her earlier composure completely shattered. "Please," she sobbed, looking up at Marcus as he emerged from the room with Lily still clinging to his neck. "Please, you have to understand. They made me do it. Salazar's people threatened to kill me if I did not cooperate. I never wanted to hurt her. I fed her every day. I made sure she was warm. I am not a monster." Marcus set Lily down gently, keeping one hand on her shoulder as he turned to face the woman who had imprisoned his daughter for a year. The rage that had been building inside him since the moment Emma first spoke. Those 9 words now reached its peak, a white-hot fury that demanded blood. He stepped toward Diana, his hands flexing at his sides. He could kill her right now, snap her neck with a single motion, or beat her until she stopped breathing. His men would say nothing. No one would mourn her. Justice would be served in the most permanent way possible. Diana saw death in his eyes and screamed, cowering backward against Daniel's grip. "Please, please, I have a family too. I was just trying to survive." Marcus raised his hand, and the room fell silent. Then a small voice cut through the tension like a blade through shadow. "Daddy." He turned. Lily stood behind him, her thin hand reaching out to grasp his fingers. Her gray eyes, so like his own, looked up at him with an expression that held no hatred, only exhaustion and a strange kind of peace. "She gave me food when I was hungry," Lily said softly. "She let me have a blanket when I was cold. She is a bad person, but she did not let me die. Please do not hurt her." Marcus stared at his daughter, at this child who had survived a year of captivity and emerged with more mercy in her heart than he had ever possessed. The rage inside him flickered, fighting against something stronger, something that felt like redemption. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and made a choice. "Take her to the police. he ordered, his voice flat and final. Alive. Daniel nodded and hauled Diana to her feet, dragging her toward the broken front door. Marcus lifted Lily into his arms again, feeling her head settle against his shoulder with a sigh of relief. Then he turned to look for the other child who had made this night possible. Emma stood alone in the corner of the room, her torn nightgown soaked with rain, her bare feet dirty against the floor. Her dark eyes watched the scene before her with an expression that was equal parts relief and desolation, like someone witnessing a happy ending they knew they were not part of. The storm spent itself sometime before dawn, leaving behind streets that glistened like wet silk and a sky that slowly blushed from gray to pink to gold. Chicago awoke to a world washed clean, unaware that in a private room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a father sat beside his daughter's bed and refused to let go of her hand. The doctors had examined Lily for hours, their faces grim as they cataloged the damage a year of captivity had inflicted on her small body: severe malnutrition, vitamin D deficiency from months without sunlight, muscle weakness from lack of movement, minor infections that had gone untreated. The list went on. Each item another wound on Marcus's soul, another reason to hunt down Victor Salazar and make him suffer. But the doctors also offered hope. Nothing permanent. Nothing that time and care and proper nutrition could not heal. Lily would recover, physically at least. The psychological scars would take longer to fade, but she was young and resilient, and she had a father who would move heaven and earth to help her heal. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, his hand wrapped around her small fingers, as if afraid she might vanish again the moment he let go. Lily slept fitfully, whimpering sometimes in her dreams, calling out for her daddy, even though he was right there. Each cry drove another nail into his heart. Outside the private room, the hospital corridor hummed with the quiet efficiency of early morning. Nurses checked charts, orderlies pushed carts of supplies, and on a hard plastic chair against the wall, a small figure sat alone and forgotten. Emma had not moved from that spot since they arrived. Her feet were still bare, still dirty from the streets of Englewood. Her torn nightgown had dried stiff against her skin. No one had offered her clothes or food or even a blanket. She was invisible, a stray that had wandered in from the storm and would soon be swept back out. A woman in a gray suit approached her, clipboard in hand, her expression professionally sympathetic. Emma Chen, I am from Child Protective Services. I understand you were living with Diana Mercer? Emma nodded, her eyes empty. We will need to process you back into the system. There is a group home on the west side that has space available. You will be safe there until we can find you a more permanent placement. Emma said nothing. She had heard these words before, different voices speaking the same script. Another home, another placement, another temporary stop on the endless journey of being unwanted. She did not cry. She had used up all her tears long ago. The social worker was reaching for Emma's arm when a shadow fell across them both. Marcus stood in the doorway of Lily's room, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. He looked exhausted, his clothes still damp from the storm, dark circles carved beneath his gray eyes. But something burned in his expression that made the social worker take an involuntary step backward. Where are you taking her? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. The woman straightened, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Back into state custody, sir. She has no legal guardian. Standard procedure for cases like this. Marcus looked at Emma then, really looked at her for the first time since the chaos of the rescue. He saw the bruises still visible on her arms. He saw the butterfly birthmark on her shoulder through the torn fabric. He saw a child who had risked everything she had, which was nothing at all, to save a stranger's daughter. This girl saved my daughter's life, Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that allowed no argument. She is coming home with us. The black car pulled through iron gates that swung open automatically, revealing a driveway lined with trees whose leaves had just begun to turn gold and crimson. Emma pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at the mansion rising before them. 3 stories of gray stone, windows that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. A garden where roses still bloomed despite the approaching autumn, tended by hands that belonged to someone else. She had never seen anything like it, except perhaps in the movies that sometimes played on the old television at the orphanage. Places like this did not exist in her world. They were fantasies, dreams that children like her were not allowed to have. The car stopped, and Marcus stepped out first, then lifted Lily gently from the back seat. She was still weak from her ordeal, her body recovering slowly from a year of deprivation, but her eyes were bright as she looked at Emma, waiting for her to follow. Emma climbed out of the car and stood frozen on the gravel driveway, her bare feet, now covered in borrowed hospital socks, seemed wrong against the pristine stones. Her hair was still tangled despite the nurse's attempts to brush it. She felt dirty and small and completely out of place. "Come on," Lily said, reaching out her hand. "I want to show you my room." Emma hesitated, glancing at Marcus. She expected him to change his mind at any moment, to realize his mistake and send her back to where she belonged, but he only nodded, a small smile softening the hard lines of his face. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers. Paintings hung on walls that stretched up toward ceilings higher than any Emma had ever seen. A staircase curved upward like something from a fairy tale, its banister polished to a shine that hurt her eyes. Emma stood in the entrance hall, afraid to move, afraid to touch anything, afraid to breathe too loudly. Lily tugged at her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. "This is your home now, too," Lily said simply, as if those words were not the most extraordinary thing Emma had ever heard. A kind-faced woman appeared, introducing herself as Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper. She led Emma to a bedroom on the second floor, right next to Lily's. The room had soft blue walls and white curtains, and a bed so large that Emma could have fit 3 of herself inside it. The blankets were thick and warm, the pillows softer than clouds. That evening, they sat together at a dining table that could have seated 20. Platters of food covered the surface, more food than Emma had seen in her entire life. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables glistening with butter, warm bread that smelled like heaven. Emma stared at her plate, her hands folded in her lap, too terrified to eat. What if this was a test? What if she took too much and they punished her? What if she woke up tomorrow and discovered it had all been a dream? Marcus noticed her hesitation. He reached across the table and gently pushed her plate closer. "Eat," he said quietly. "No one will take it away. Not tonight. Not ever." Emma ate until her stomach ached, then ate a little more because she could not quite believe the food would still be there if she stopped. That night, after a bath in hot water that did not run out and clean pajamas softer than anything she had ever worn, Emma lay in her new bed and stared at the ceiling. Lily's voice drifted across the darkness from the bed beside hers. "Is this real?" Emma whispered. "Will I have to leave tomorrow?" She felt Lily's hand reach across the gap between their beds, small fingers finding hers and holding tight. "You are my sister now," Lily said with absolute certainty. Sisters stay together forever. The days that followed were filled with 2 different kinds of work. Inside the mansion, Marcus watched his daughters heal. Outside, he hunted the man who had stolen a year of their lives. Daniel led the pursuit with the relentless efficiency that had made him invaluable for 15 years. Victor Salazar had gone underground the moment Diana failed to answer her phone, but a man who ran a criminal empire could not simply vanish. There were accounts to access, contacts to call, escape routes that required preparation. Each of these left traces, and Daniel followed every single one. They found Salazar 3 days later, hiding in a warehouse on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana, surrounded by 4 bodyguards and enough cash to start over somewhere far away. Marcus received the call while sitting in the garden, watching Lily teach Emma how to play with a dollhouse she had not touched in over a year. "We have him," Daniel said. "What do you want us to do?" Marcus looked at his daughters through the window. Lily was laughing for the first time since her rescue, her golden hair catching the sunlight. Emma sat beside her, hesitant but hopeful, slowly learning that joy was something she was allowed to feel. He thought about Victor Salazar, about the hatred that had driven the man to steal a child and keep her locked in darkness for 366 days. For most of his life, Marcus would have answered this question with violence. He would have gone to that warehouse himself, would have made Salazar suffer for weeks before finally allowing him to die. That was the law of the world he had built, the only justice he had ever known. But something had changed inside him. Perhaps it was watching Lily forgive Diana even after everything she had endured. Perhaps it was seeing Emma's face when she finally understood that the food on her plate would not be taken away. Perhaps it was simply the realization that his daughters were watching, learning, becoming who they would be based on what they saw him do. "Call the FBI," Marcus said quietly. "Give them everything. The warehouse location, the financial records, the names of everyone involved. Let the law handle it." Daniel was silent for a long moment. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. The arrest made national news. Victor Salazar, wanted for human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy across 4 states. 11 other children recovered from various locations, reunited with families who had given up hope. A network of corruption exposed, from the social workers who looked the other way to the politicians who had been paid to stay silent. Diana Mercer stood trial 2 months later. She pleaded guilty to kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, her testimony helping to convict a dozen others in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus did not attend the proceedings. He had already given her more mercy than she deserved. As autumn deepened into winter, Marcus began the slow work of transformation. He sold off the illegal operations one by one, transferring power to men who would carry on without him. The restaurants expanded, becoming legitimate businesses that employed hundreds. The money laundering stopped. The violence faded. The empire that had been built on fear and blood slowly became something his daughters could be proud of. On a cold December morning, Marcus sat in a lawyer's office and signed the final adoption papers. Emma stood beside him, wearing a new dress and shoes that actually fit her feet, her hair brushed and shining, her eyes wide with disbelief. The lawyer smiled and stamped the document. "Congratulations, Emma Thornton." Emma looked at Marcus, then at Lily, who was bouncing with excitement beside her, then back at the paper that bore her new name. For the first time in 7 years of abandonment and abuse and loneliness, she had a family. 1 year later, the Thornton mansion overflowed with a sound it had not known for far too long. Laughter echoed through the hallways, bounced off the marble floors, and spilled out into the garden, where roses bloomed in every color imaginable. Emma had transformed completely. The gaunt, bruised child who had stood barefoot on a scorching sidewalk was gone, replaced by a healthy girl with rosy cheeks and bright eyes that sparkled with mischief. She had grown 3 inches and gained the weight her body had desperately needed. Her hair, once tangled and dull, now fell in shiny waves past her shoulders. The butterfly birthmark on her shoulder was no longer something she hid beneath torn fabric. She wore it proudly now, displayed in summer dresses and tank tops, a symbol of the journey that had brought her home. Lily had healed too, though some nights she still woke from dreams of locked doors and endless darkness. On those nights, Emma would climb into bed beside her, and the 2 sisters would hold hands until the fear passed. They shared a room despite having a dozen empty ones to choose from, their beds pushed close together so they could whisper secrets across the gap. Marcus had become a different man entirely. The ruthless mafia king who had built an empire on fear now spent his evenings reading bedtime stories, doing all the voices, just as Lily remembered. He attended school plays and soccer games. He learned to braid hair, badly at first, then better with practice. He discovered that true strength was not measured in how many enemies he could destroy, but in how gently he could hold his daughters when they cried. On this particular evening, the 3 of them sat on the back porch, watching the sun sink below the Chicago skyline. The sky burned orange and pink and gold, painting the clouds like a masterpiece. Emma leaned against Marcus's shoulder, her eyes half closed with contentment. Lily sat on his other side, one hand holding his, the other reaching across to hold Emma's. 3 people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances, now bathed in the warm light of a setting sun. Sometimes angels come from the places we least expect. A forgotten child covered in bruises and fear saved another child from the darkness. And together, they saved a man who had been dying inside his own shadows. Family is not about blood. Family is not about the past or who we used to be. Family is about the people we choose to love and protect every single day. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that no matter where you come from, no matter what you have been through, you deserve to be loved. Comment the number 1 if you believe that, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story. We would love to hear your thoughts. How did this story make you feel? Has it reminded you of something in your own life? Please share your feelings in the comments below, because your voice matters to us. Thank you for listening. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in every single day of your life. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.